Hi, and welcome back to Resilience Unraveled. And today I'm chatting to a Brit, which is always lovely. Chris Endersby is sitting in front of me. We're in the same time zone, I'm assuming. So, first
Yes,
of all,
yep.
Chris, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Russell. Very good. And thanks for the invitation for today.
And where in the world are you? Just out of interest.
In Kent. So
Oh,
it's
right.
an optimal distance from London in my book.
Well, look, tell us a bit about yourself, because it's a joy to have us with you today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, just yesterday, somebody asked me, when did I start my career? It's a boring conversation for a Sunday. But I said next year was when
Oh,
because I don't think I've managed to start a traditional career yet. I think
mm,
what I have managed to do is, in kind of sailing terms, tack quite successfully across a load of headwinds and tailwinds as life has thrown at me. But the potted history, I suppose, that I spent the first few years of my career doing child protection social work on the duty desks, working with everything that came through the doors, without at that time the help of chat or AI or any of these other things, or even mobile phones. So did that for a while. Then I worked for another 7 or 8 years, still in local government, in a range of policy type roles, till I ended up working with the chief executive of a local authority doing innovation planning and thinking about all sort of telehealth 10 years before it became prevalent,
wow.
community TV 15 years before it became prevalent, etc. So very
Brilliant.
much
Yeah.
ahead of our time, the People's Lottery, all these other random things that
Mm,
county councillors would think of. Then I was fortunate, I think looking back in hindsight, very fortunate to segue from public into private sector, sold my soul, as it might be said, went to work in big finance. So did that for just under 10 years in a variety of guises, working for large, both American and UK companies. And finally, about 5 years ago, stepped into my own business. And that's kind of how you see me now, at least in a professional context.
all right. Tons to talk about there. So, I mean, it's interesting when you think about local government because I'm guessing at the time you were doing this, it must have been t early turn of the century sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Started in 1998, full time work, and yeah, left. And I think just before the financial crash, I've
Yes.
managed to maintain a public and private moral panic around my work. So when I started in child protection, I'm sure you may remember cases like Victoria Climbié
Yeah.
and other very high-profile cases where to be a children and families social worker was the most unpopular thing at a party because
Mm,
everybody, I mean, probably still is, in fairness, everyone would assume you're the wrong side of that risk debate on
yeah.
either snatching children without due cause or leaving them there and
Mm,
suffering harm. I then worked to set up reception centres in Kent when we had 150 families and children in total across the whole county of all
yes.
time. And then fairly soon, and still today, that became one of the most controversial jobs to
Mm,
hold, and then moved into the quiet backwaters of the well-respected people that could sign your passports as a bank manager. We all remember those days when
mm,
grey and dull and male, stale and pale was the way to go. So that was very deemed, I think, professional and responsible. And of course, then we had the financial crash and everybody hated bankers.
yes.
So yes, I really have done well, I think, to prejudge my entry into professions and industries just before increasing moral
Yes.
panic and disdain. So,
Just come back to child protection for Will, just
yes.
if you don't mind. Because one of the things I'm always intrigued, because I'm a son of a social worker, so I sort of understand the
Mm,
reputation that social workers have and sometimes unwarranted and probably at the time a lot freer than it exists today. But I'm also interested in people like child protection people, social workers. How
mhm.
do you maintain those boundaries? How do you keep yourself, I'm going to say sane, and I'm going to do it in that sort of colloquial fashion rather than any sort of pejorative mental health sort of way. But how do you maintain that sense of having the energy to do that job? Because it's deeply wearing, isn't it?
It is, and I don't think, however effective your strategies are, I never think they mitigate and they
Mm,
reduce it, but there are always cases, situations, circumstances that cut to the quick and continue to do so. I was really fortunate as a young social worker, and I was young
mm,
because I started at the age of 22, and as a young 22-year-old male would have been like the outlier, which was
yeah.
very strange when I then come into financial services, where that's the commonplace,
Yeah.
and so very weird.
Find
But
your
I was very
posse.
lucky that I had a very supportive and very experienced team around me who,
Yeah.
almost to the point of predating the social services departments in which they were working.
Mm.
So we're kind of going back quite some while there. But one of the ladies who I worked with, Sylvia, she always used to wear the same cardigan. This isn't a fashion statement. There is a point to this. So she had this in the duty desk because at that point we had a fixed location. We weren't working from home. So I think that made it a lot easier for a start. And whenever she would be on the duty desk, she would wear the same cardigan. And when she finished, she would take the cardigan off,
Yeah.
leave it in
Same
the
as
duty desk.
mm.
And what I realized quite early on is that it's often micro rituals like
Yeah.
that where you can adopt a persona, you can adopt a role of that person,
Yeah.
and then when you finish that role, you have that same ritual again regarding,
Yeah.
okay, so I've taken that piece of clothing off, or I've left the cup of tea, the mug that I always use when I'm there, and those other little things, so that at least physically separating and psychologically separating at least becomes possible. And I think that's where I was quite relieved almost that I don't do that job now. And, having to kind of be supporting some of those calls from home, or lone working then was going out to people's
Yeah.
houses,
On your
lone
own.
working now is
Mm.
being in your own house
Yeah.
as much.
First world
But
problems.
I definitely think that some of those micro habits really helped. And as ever, having a supportive network around you, I think it's when you feel that you can take on all of society's ills single-handedly. And I think consistent with my research and consistent with my practice, I think it was often when the system failed that
Mm.
I think were the ones that were harder to deal with, rather than
Yeah.
when a child's circumstances were so horrific, and I think those are ones that still I struggle with, where, the system in some way was found to let the children and young people down, or let the families down,
Yes.
because I think they're the locus of control to deal with those things. It's so much more remote.
Yeah.
Whereas when cases are clear cut, or whatever those things are, at least you feel empowered to respond.
Yes.
But yes.
Interesting. I mean, you're mentioning something that I think is deeply contentious, actually, and in the modern world, because I'm a very big believer in persona management,
Mm-hmm.
and believe we are different people at home and at work, and I absolutely loathe this idea of authenticity, and that we should be ourselves all the time, because we are never truly ourselves, because when you
Mm.
with any group of people, you are always adapting a different persona. Some of it's status led, some of it's
Yeah.
communication, whatever it might be. And you must find this even running your own business, that you adopt a different persona when you're going to say a group of clients than when you're actually with your team. And I don't know why the rise of authenticity has sort of swept the board. So this idea that you should be yourself all the time, that you
Mm.
should, you should be sharing yourself all the time. I mean, maybe there's just I'm, deeply
No, it's
cynical.
good. Well, I love it because we can have a good ding dong about this. So that's always really good, Russell. So I understand I didn't use it that much in common parts, but as you raised it, the term of the authentic chameleon, which I'm sure you probably
Yes.
heard of before. So I know even when I talk about sort of how I am at home versus how I am at work, I think actually realizing that we're multifaceted,
Yeah.
realizing that, and context is so important, which is why I struggle with so many kind of personality tests, and DISC
Oh yeah.
practitioners and Myers-Briggs and all that stuff,
Yeah.
because
Don't get me
we're more
started.
complex beings, and we change over time. We're more adaptive to the environments which we're in, etc. So I think it is okay to be authentic, yeah, but still have a different presentation of myself in a boardroom than I would playing on the floor with my kids, at
Mm.
home. But I don't think those differences in how I project myself, the words I need to use, the clothes I wear, the behaviors I use, I still think that all of those are important components of me, more or less important at different times. And that sort of greater the sum of the whole, if you were to collect all of those different behaviors, firstly, I hope there'll be a degree of congruence between
Mm.
them. There might be difference, but I think there's a degree of congruence. And I think collectively, I hope they do make up who authentically I am, even if I choose not to fully divulge all of those aspects of myself to all people in equal measure. In the same way as I wouldn't sit down with my children, sort of 9, 8, and 9, and present via PowerPoint on some topic.
No, no, of course.
But I think they're all important parts of who I am. And when you get that, then you can be free and you can be liberated by those
Mm.
different parts of you rather than conflicted by them.
But you do see this move towards you should be yourself, and yeah, there's always an element of sort of, I love this phrase, woke scolding that links with authenticity, which is you must be yourself, you must share yourself, your feelings, your secrets, your thoughts, and all that sort of stuff. And I think
Mm.
sometimes that people have lost the sense of what authenticity really was truly
Mm.
about. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? It's been
Yeah.
warped to fit a different sort of narrative. So you talked about the authentic chameleon, and the point of
Mm.
authentic chameleon is some of you stays the same at all times, and some
Yeah.
of you just changes, isn't it? So is that something? I mean, how would you use that model?
So let me give you an example. So when we set up Firestarter, values, and I don't want to go into, I know there's a whole thing about whether corporate
Don't
values
get
are
me
things anyway,
started on values.
but it makes it easy for us because there's two of us leading the business.
Mm,
Yeah. So we don't have to go through some stakeholder, it's
yeah,
what's important to us as individuals. So I
yeah.
think that they can be a lot more personal, a lot more driven. So if I think about my values in running the business, and I think about my values as who I am as a person when I'm at home and in other contexts with my mates from school or friends out of that, I think it's those values that help me glue, how I want to be and how I show up. So we have things like playfulness. Yeah,
Mm,
I like to enjoy life, having fun. And I think there's a serious element to being playful, being
mm,
creative and having fun with things, I think is actually a really good way through a lot of situations. Yeah. Unity, this idea that you can't do things, or even if you can do things on your own, it's much more fun to do things with
mm,
other people. So from myself, I think it's if you have those values, those things that, glue us where we want to go to, why we get up in the morning, then those can be consistent and you can judge what you do and what you choose not to do and the decisions that you make against your value base. And when I think you're more cognizant of what drives you, what you think is important, then I think you can translate those differently into different contexts. So, for example, we're foster parents. Well, my wife's a foster parent, and therefore, by default, so am I. I think it's the equivalent of being married to a pub landlady or landlord and living above the pub. So
mm,
by default, you're going to carry the glasses, you're going to do the pot wash, you're going to help out. But we work with a lot of young people, have the benefit of some young people come whose English isn't first language, or
mm.
perhaps who just may have had a very different family experience. So I was trying to think for ages. I didn't want this list of rules on the fridge.
Mm.
Almost like you must do this, you must do that. Because I see that so much, and I think how depressing for a young person coming into a house. So I tried to simplify it, and where I came up with was be kind,
Mm,
to yourself and others, and be useful.
mm,
Yeah. So I think that's sort of quite a simple analogy of can we operate business and life in a way that demonstrates kindness? Yeah. And I think the important one I put in there, as you probably noticed, was to ourselves as much to others, because I think too often we can be very good at being kind to other people whilst being unkind to ourselves in equal measure. And are we doing something that's useful? Are we doing something that's meaningful? Are we doing something that's purposeful? And I
mm.
think I've come to that view through many years, both professionally and personally, that get those two things right in life on a day-to-day basis, and you're halfway towards where you need to be. So that for me is a good example of how kind and useful is how I want to run my business, how I want to be perceived by my clients, but it's also how I would want to be portrayed, my children or, friends around me. I would hope those would be things that,
Yes.
I would be known for ubiquitously, although they might appear different in the behaviors I use or the language.
Yes. Yeah, because some of it has to adapt, isn't it? I mean, you can't be. I mean, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I remember years ago, a very, very famous American law firm who had a very innovative style of working. And, one of the features was that Fridays they didn't wear business dress. I mean, shock
Mm-hmm.
horror. They weren't allowed mustaches and beards as well. I'm just looking at you
Yeah,
here.
thank you. Yeah.
So I mean, that marks out who this is because everybody knows who this is because they're famous for wearing black shoes, black socks, and all the other
Yeah.
navy blue shoes, blah, blah, blah. But I remember an emergency in a merchant bank and they all had to go scooting across there. I think 30 consultants ran across there on a Friday. And as they were arriving in the building, they were being fired.
Wow.
Because what they did is they were living their values and not adapting that into their client setting. And I think And I think sometimes we have this idea that we have to force our authenticity on other people, don't we? This is who I am, so take me or leave me. Now, that is an interesting way of sifting out in a small organization who you want to work with. But I wonder if
Yeah,
that's actually even possible when you get into larger organizations. I just wondering what you think about banks, because they're notorious for stimulating or what's the not stimulating? What's the opposite of snuffing out any form of individuality.
yeah.
That's the word.
I think there's, well, I mean, there's so many different directions we could take this in. So I think like it's interesting, isn't it? So you take the example of big banks or big business, and then let's say the DEI or climate pledges, that then you get a
Mm,
change of political administration,
mm.
and all of a sudden BP are back
Yeah,
drill.
yeah. Money, money, money.
Large American organizations are suddenly all of a sudden fired everybody DEI because they're, and that's when I think you get weather vane kind of like
Mm,
attitudes and values, isn't it? Just spinning
yeah,
around depending upon the weather. Whereas you get other brands and other businesses who can afford to be, more signpost and more
yeah.
enduring and more resilient to that, and potentially, arguably, may not be as prepared or as feel the need to follow the fad or the zeitgeist of the day, and are
Mm,
prepared to stick through that. And I think possibly that's when you begin to see the true colors. A company we worked for a while ago, they do kind of, they're a consultant firm, but smaller than the big
mm.
four. But one of the things but these are two very, and I have to this for say for your international audience, I apologize, but very brush kind of like Yorkshireman type attitude. Like,
Oh yeah. Mm,
I don't know if maybe Russell, you might be best articulating that to others, but very kind of stereotypical, see as you find, it is like this, call it as
mm.
it is, those kind of things. So one of their things was that they celebrate and commiserate, wins in the business or losses in the business in the same way as a beer and a curry, and they're very
Yes.
much of that kind of culture. Now, for
Yeah.
them, it was really important that they were able to message and signpost potential recruits in
Mm,
that that was what it's like to work here. We're going to be a team, we're going to do this, but these shared rituals are not for everybody. Yeah.
yes.
And they recognized that, and that they weren't trying to be all things to all people. What they were trying to do was build a strong, cohesive team, and signaling in things like beer and a curry that these guys, it was two guys were chairing this, so we're chairing the CEO. That's the kind of team we unapologetically
Mm,
want to build, but recognizing that's more likely to result in successful hires. It's more likely to bring the people around you who you're going to want to work with, and it becomes self-reinforcing, etc. But was it the most diverse? Was it the most, I don't know, kind of agnostic to all other things? Probably not.
mm.
But for them, that's what they wanted to portray, and I think it was true to them. Whereas we've had other clients who've gone on about trust and
Oh yeah.
transparency and, all these buzzwords,
Yeah.
and have proved in time to be absolutely anything but.
Great. Yeah. I
So I think
think,
you have to judge people by the behaviors as well as by what they say, or more so, I would argue.
yeah. And again, you give me lots to go at there. So there's a problem with scaling in organizations, isn't it? Because when you're small, you can have something that looks unique, different. And I mean, and sort of the theory of the firm is you start off by being like that. As you grow and grow and grow and grow, you have more and more customers. And instead of being, acquisitive and imaginative and
Mm-hmm.
creative and all that sort of stuff, you become risk averse and cautious because actually you don't lose what you've got. And so
Yeah.
you sort of become more chameleon-like. What was interesting is I used to work with a big automotive manufacturer, and they used to have that culture you talked about. They were beer, golf, very blokey, very manly, and they used to basically say, all these youngsters coming through, we've got a choice. We can change our entire organization to fit them, or we can give them the skills to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, given they were massively successful in a scale of, true purpose of leadership is to, ratchet as much productivity from the salary you're paying. They
Mm-hmm.
were enormously successful through that. And I always wonder whether those two or three concepts are mixed, lost, don't get enough conversation. It's almost like we're frightened to have the conversations these days about, if you're working for an organization, part of business resilience is you have to know what you stick to, and it's not wrong to say we're here just to make money because all the vast majority
Yeah.
of organizations are still there for the benefit of their shareholders, aren't they? Now, you're different because as a shareholder, you can give all your money away if you want and do what you want. I wonder if you do.
Well, all of my £4.52 and a packet of Smints. Yeah. So we're blessed because we as you say we have ultimate discretion. We're a small business, so we can afford to make those decisions both in terms of lifestyle and the support that we provide, our families, etc., but
Of
also
course.
wider causes. So I think for us that decision is easier. So I think that where I've seen it as well in companies scaling and growing, and in fact we're working with one right now who had this real strong sense of themselves, what they're doing, very founder
Mm.
led, and they've done incredibly well, I have to
Mm.
say. But almost to get to then where they felt comfortable again,
Yeah.
they almost felt like they had to pretend to be somebody else. Because you've got to grow up, you've got to project this image to get whether it's VC funding or whether it's private equity funding or in time for an IPO, etc. Unfortunately, there are certain expectations of businesses and organizations that often people, rightly or wrongly, feel that they have to fit into in
Yes.
order to get ahead and to be seen to be an equal of or a viable alternative to a large brand. You almost have to act as if,
Mm.
that the CTO or the CEO or the board wouldn't get fired for choosing you because
Mm.
you're acting as if you're a large organization. But where this firm are is they come through the other side of that now,
Mm.
and they're going, we've kind of lost a sense of who we are and what
Yeah.
we're about along the journey, because they had been chasing the quarterly sales targets, the pressures that they're on due to investment rounds in order to show a return and fill the order book and
Mm.
grow year on year and exponentials. But having established themselves well within their industry as thought leaders and, very innovative firm, they're now looking at themselves and going, actually, what does it mean to work for us? What does it mean to do that? Unfortunately for them, they still have some of the same team around them who
Yes.
can remember what it was that got them there
Yeah.
and can shape that, for where they want to go for the next chapter.
And that resilience comes from corporate memory as well, doesn't it? It's important because we know lots of organizations that, sit on the top of the mountainside, oming, and go out of business quite quickly. There has to be this blend. And the point of diversity is always about creating a blend that actually adds to the sum total of the culture, really. It was interesting years ago. I remember the point of what you're sort of saying there. One of the key things about organizations is that strong sense of purpose and going somewhere.
Mm.
And I remember working with a PE firm, and they had a pharma company in their portfolio, and the board member was, I would say, there were five key values, honesty, truth, integrity, trust, and all the old blah. And I went in to do some work with them, and I knew the one of the senior leaders was siphoning off money. Everybody knew that. There was bullying going on. There were inappropriate sexual relationships at the board level. It was all appalling. It was all the case study of what should not happen in an
Mm-hmm.
organization. Boy, they were one of the most successful organizations I ever saw. Growth
Mm-hmm.
targets achieved, shareholder returns achieved, everything. And it's almost like you either do it all wrong and all bad because everybody knows where they are then. And I think what we've lost is that strong sense of honesty in businesses where as a group of adults you sort of figure out what it's going to be like and then you
Yeah.
do it rather than the pretense of saying actually we're going to pretend to be this thing over here and then no one's really signed up and no one heads that direction. Do you know what you think?
I do, absolutely. Well, I think the way when we do values organization, values selection and do workshops on with companies, and obviously we're always putting those, as you might appreciate, I think, in an arc of like their history to where they want to go, because it's not something you can just pick out the out of Wednesday afternoon and say, right, we're going
Yes.
to do those. And what does he say? Kind of sort of strongly held, was it sort of strong views loosely held? So that's
Mm.
absolutely this, and then tomorrow it's absolutely that. We tend to work with those and how we describe it is it's those aspects, but they should be kind of hard to reach. So it's almost
Mm.
like to bit in physical terms, it's like that thing that you want at the top shelf, or
Yes.
just out of reach at the supermarket. So you've got to be able
Yeah.
to do it's got to be attainable.
Yeah.
But it's also got to aspire towards something. Values should still be, I think, a little bit pushing you towards the best version of yourselves, the best version of the clients you want to make. And we help put that in the context of, and again, Russell, you might have your own take on these. Maybe this is a whole nother podcast we can come back to do another time.
Please.
But we put them in the context of the mission, the vision, and the purpose of the organization. So try to
Yeah.
see things longitudinally. So we understand purpose, that it's very rare. And to your point, sometimes it is, I've just seen the opportunity to make a load of money. Let's go there. And
Yeah.
we've definitely dealt with some businesses, but they're generally, most people don't accidentally start a business. Yeah. So
Mm,
it's not something you roll out of bed in the morning and you do by mistake. There's a degree of purposefulness, intentionality around setting up a business. So for some people, that's something that drives them because it irritates them about, the
mm,
status quo or how things are done, or I could do this so much better. And for others, it's an opportunity. It's striving towards something. The vision is what they want to achieve, at some point in the future when they've kind of been successful. And the mission links the two together. So, what are they doing today, day in, day out? What do you wake up? That's your mission. And these are things you're
mm,
actually working on in the short term, medium term to achieve your vision and keep going. And we find that for those organizations that have that longitudinal view, it gives you the grit and the determination to keep going. Because I
mm,
think otherwise, I don't think it almost matters what point you are at a business, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the new person in. I think if you're just relying upon, it's a third, to keep the list of these ones we'd have another conversation with. But if you're just relying upon a list of SMART goals,
mm, mm,
in a 360 HR review thing of like, I must achieve this by that point, quantifiable measures and outcomes, I think you're just going to end up in knots and really stressed
mm,
and, on this ever pursuit to do more. So I think if you don't have something more purposeful, more intentional, more meaningful to guide you and allow yourself the opportunity that maybe you're not going to achieve that, and that part of it comes in the pursuit, part of it comes in the challenge, part of it comes in the journey, not just did I achieve 94% of that particular KPI
mm,
over those 3 months, because it's just relentless anyway, I think, and it's
mm.
not necessarily good for people's mental well-being either.
It's interesting. There's two things pop to mind. One, which is absolutely supporting your argument, is the charitable sector and this idea of purpose. People who are engaged or even over-engaged who work many, many hours for less than a market rate for whatever that may be, because of that sense of purpose and social good or whatever that might be. But also, I'm also thinking of someone who runs a business, who has a family business, who
Mm.
runs 3 or 4 newsagent shops. They have no sense of purpose. They just go to work every day, and they're as loyal and committed as an employee, and they go to work at 5 in the morning and they open up.
Mm.
Bizarrely enough, they still have papers. I didn't think newspapers existed. Apparently, do. They still
Still
have
do.
they
Yeah.
still have milk, and it's in
Yeah.
a very nice little hamlet, and I do think there are people who are running businesses who have fallen into it as well, and they have no sense. I mean, this is a business that's not even computerized, and
Yeah.
we may be picking at absolute exceptions to illustrate a point, which is
Hmm.
not necessarily useful. But I suppose where I'm going with this is that you've made three big career choices, haven't you? You went into local government, which is one choice. You went into the corporate sector, which is the third, and then you've gone into your own business. What did
Mhm.
those three decisions sort of have in common, would you say?
Okay. So I think that all three, the commonality was I didn't know that I could successfully do any of them. And arguably, as I've worked out, I could do one. I then thought, well, I could possibly, you
Right.
know, not achieve something else and still be okay. So I think for me, whether it's personal, kind of academic studies, or whether it's career, or those which I use loosely, as I said at the start, I think it's always that sense that there's more, that I want to achieve more. I want to do something else, something bigger. I was very, very fortunate in my first job. I was lucky to commission leadership development programs
Mm,
relatively on in my career, and got surrounded by professors from business schools or senior people within industry
yeah.
who almost gave me a kind of free sheep dip into their thinking. And I remember he was an ex-army officer who at the time headed up Kent Business School, a guy called Martin Jones, I think his name was. But he said to me, Chris, I only ever go for a job that I know I can do 50% of. Because
Oh,
he said, any less, and I would probably fail, and any more, and I'd get bored.
yes.
So I always took that position on thereafter, that, I don't want to do a job or take on an opportunity that I know is an absolute slam dunk, that I can do that, no
Mm,
trouble. But neither do I want to spend every day failing, and every day feeling that,
yes.
I've sold my soul, or I'm a sham here, that I can't possibly do this, and the stress associated with those. So I think somewhere between those 2 points of some periods of comfort and some periods of celebration and achievement and
Mm,
ease, is lovely. We
yes.
don't want every day and all time to be challenging. but also some grit, having some things that are difficult. So I don't think I think I didn't know if I could do any of those jobs when I
Mm.
started. The one common thing I think is that they've all been built upon relationships.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you'd like to think they're about subject matter knowledge, or it's called network these days, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I don't really think it is. I think it's the ability to form relationships.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're transactional. Yeah. You know, if you're working in projects, you want that person to do your project work before the 27 other projects they've got on their hands. And,
Yeah. That's right.
you know, it's quite instrumental like that. Another time you really want to learn and you want to grow and you want to be aside someone because they're exemplary at what they do and you want a bit of that. You want to,
Mm.
it's like by osmosis, if nothing else, learn how to do
Mm.
it. But I think that's the common theme. And I think that probably where social work helped at the start was, if you do it well, I still think it's all about building relationships. And I think that's probably the
Yeah.
thing that I've taken forwards.
I'll come back to that in a minute, if I
Mm,
may. I'm just writing that down to the point to come back. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that I always talk about the fact that I think it's brilliant if people have had exposure to things like telesales and sales in their
mm,
lives because it teaches them relentlessness, persistence, and not getting worried about getting rejected because it's just part of the
yeah.
process. But I also think there's something, entrepreneurship's become quite fashionable to the
Mm,
extent it's lost the point of why entrepreneurship is a really good thing to do for you because it really does hone fresh skills. It creates a different way of thinking about the world. And, look at some politicians who've never stepped out of PPE and lobbying and
yeah.
whatever else might be. I also think it's really interesting because what you do as an entrepreneur is you do learn this resilience. You do learn to deal with setbacks, people saying no. I mean, you'll be pitching for deals today, even though you're
Yeah.
successful, you're running a successful business. I do as well. I'm writing bids and people come back
Yeah.
to say, no, we don't want you. And it's like, how can you not want me? And but you have to learn in life, don't you, to deal with that resilience curve as someone saying no, someone it all going wrong. And just seeing it's just part of the process of accountability and learning. I think we spend too much time these days blaming others instead of taking that accountability and saying, okay, I didn't get it. So either let's get on and get the next one, but also what are we going to take from it? Because there's always something to get from that process. I don't know
And
what you think.
absolutely. And I think that's where sort of probably some social media things as well don't really help in that
No.
regard, because almost all of, if not all, but sometimes obviously people don't divulge, and obviously Russell, you probably know as many or more people that I would in this situation. But almost all of the really successful people, and I'm caveat this by whom I look up to, who I in
Mm,
some way have had something which somebody else might consider a weakness or a flaw or
yes.
a disadvantage or some kind of thing that would have held them back, whether it's something like ADHD or dyslexia or something in their earlier life
Yeah.
or, a previous business. I mean, I was talking to a guy the other day who's used to work in health and social care as a business, and obviously that business didn't work out, but you could tell 10 years later,
Yeah.
the human cost to him of these NHS social care contracts that had to be
Mm,
unwound and
mm,
you got staff and patients or that, but that clearly has stayed with him for
yeah.
I felt it viscerally. This guy
Yeah.
explained it to me. He's actually doing something completely different now as a business, but would he be doing what he did today, without? But yeah, I think you've got to encourage failure. I think in my limited experience of these things, the no's, the kickbacks, they're great. You want them. You
Yeah.
don't
You
want
want
them
them?
all, which is my
No.
50-50 thing.
Yeah.
What you don't want is the meh and the nothing and the
Yeah.
no response and the
Yeah.
continued negotiation and the, well, it
Yeah.
might be this, it might, a hard no because of very clear reasons. This isn't right for us timing wise, price wise,
Yeah.
proposition wise. Bring those on because that is free consultancy, isn't
Yeah.
it? You think about it, like every time
Yeah.
you learn more, or I certainly learn more when I lose a bid. I learn so much more about my
Yeah.
business than when I win one. Very few people say the reasons why we went with you against other people is for this, because I go, great, you got it, handshake. And
Mm,
I think very few businesses ask,
mm,
why us?
yeah.
Like, was it a no compete? Did you have other people? Whereas when you get a no, you're soul searching, aren't you? It's like,
Mm,
was it this? Was it that? What did
mm,
I kind of get let down on? So I think if you can see no's as the only way to get a yes is to get a no kind of thing. So
yes.
welcome it. But also that's where you're going to learn much more.
Yeah.
about personal development or professional or your business than getting a yes, weirdly.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because people don't understand this often, that there are two phases to running any project, isn't it? There's the phase which is called winning the bid. And at the end of the time you've won the bid, you put all that aside and you say, okay, let's actually look at what we really need to do now. And I think people forget that bit. I remember years ago being told that by a project manager in Fujitsu at the time, saying, you have to say what you say to get the bid. And after that, you have to sit down
Wasn't
afterwards and say, well,
wasn't
actually, what's
Horizon?
this real
Wasn't
deal?
Horizon? Was it they were
Well,
talking
I'm
about?
not
Sorry,
mentioning,
they
I'm not necessarily talking
were
about
clearly
the
right with that
division.
one, weren't they? Yeah.
But I think
Sorry.
that's important as well as a reality to how you work with life. Now, there used to be a phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And
Hmm.
I think it's interesting that it's almost like we went away from that idea because that became incestuous. It became um, a bit cozy. It became,
Yeah.
that unconscious bias. Well, I always know the people I like and I like the people I know and all that sort of stuff. So we sort of got away from that concept of relationships in that sense.
Mhm.
But I wonder if the pendulum is swinging back towards that sort of idea of relationships, being, and especially in the modern world, because actually it's so difficult to hang on to anything else.
Think we always talk about relevance versus resonance
Mm,
when it comes to how you position the business and therefore yourself, etc., which I think kind of comes some way towards that. So even in very structured RFQ, RFP, RFI processes, which are logical and rational, and they've got the scoring, and you get a
yeah.
bunch of 20 people together to do their independent scoring. Research suggests
Oh
they're
yeah.
still far more subjective than people might
Completely.
like to
Yeah.
might like to give credit to, and particularly and interestingly as well, those people closer to it are more likely, who have more knowledge, are more likely to be subjective than the ones who are actually
Yeah.
further away from the decision,
Yeah.
because often they're doing that kind of confirmation bias, aren't they? The ranking as a way of justifying a decision which
Yeah.
subconsciously maybe or even overtly has been made, and therefore you go into that process. So recognizing that people do still make decisions bottom up, so it is gut and heart, which is an integral part of making a decision as a rational one is. And particularly if you want that decision to build a relationship, therefore to not be transactional, but to be based upon partnership and growth and investing in each other's success, not just cheapest price wins. We can
Mm,
deliver X widgets at point
mm.
one cheap, 1p cheaper than
Yeah.
supplier B, or get it there two
Yeah.
hours earlier. So I think there is a degree of at least likability, relatability, whether this is someone who you'd want to do business with and could see yourself doing business with and want to be associated with, which I think is at least more personable
Yes.
than we otherwise might like to suggest is the case.
And we're sort of using the myth of the AI to say, well, we're going to depersonalize this, remove that bias and such like. But we forget that AI is the sum total of what we know already. So it's sort of locked in, isn't it? So
Exactly, and it avoids the. I mean, it's always going to give you the next most likely answer, isn't it? I
mm,
mean, that's how these kind of LLMs, to my, I'm not a technologist, but I think it's how they're more probabilistic than perhaps. Whereas, of course, most innovations, most breakthroughs that have really been paradigm shifting haven't necessarily followed that probabilistic,
no,
rational,
the reverse, in fact.
driven. It's accidental,
Yeah.
it's reversing something, it's coming up with something quite left field, a thing that won't work. And I think, yes, if you're just relying upon probabilistic decision making such as AI, you're only going to not only get the sum of what's already there, but the next mediocre middle of the road step towards the next thing.
So you talked earlier about being playful, and your website,
Mm,
Firestarter.live, is all about what you do, which is, I think, is it called fusing creativity and psychology? And
yes.
you're broadly in the marketing space.
Yes, branding,
I'm sure
absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
going to talk a bit more depth about that. But I'm quite interested in that idea. So this is almost going back to your values earlier about the play and this idea of being able to have integrity, but and I like the idea that you send things to people's voice on the mailing list. This you send some insubordination to them on a regular basis. I like the way that's sort of played through, and I think
Yeah.
you're sort of doing what a lot of people don't do, which is you're representing yourself in that way. So it's very clear that some people look at you and go, I don't want any of that," and some people look at you and go, "Boy, I need some of that." So it is. I do think having that strong statement of a persona is really important.
I agree. Well, I think that particularly, so we would argue this is one of the things that branding helps with over sort of marketing. So if you see them as two very, very helpful tools for a business. So you ideally want to work with and be found attractive to clients that you want to work with as well. It's kind of symbiotic. Supplier client, you really want to find clients that really want to work with you as a supplier, and vice versa. So ideally, in positioning yourself very clearly, it allows you to be really attractive to the people that want to buy from you and the people for whom you want to serve and you believe you can serve. And therefore, some of those people who aren't right for you, or you don't think, or they don't think you're right for them, they're going to be turned off, and that's okay. I mean, we're a very small business and we can't afford to work with everybody, and we wouldn't want to work with everybody. No, not everybody would find what we do right for them either. But I think it really helps all parties to set out that stall up front. And so one of the things we have on our website, I hope it's still there and it still works, it certainly should the first time you go there, is that you're sent to a kind of like, are you feeling rebellious landing page. And if you say no, then we click you off towards, a Google search of other London-based branding agencies, because that's fine. We want people who want to be a bit rebellious, because actually it's not an altruistic, it makes our jobs easier. If we're working with founders who want to kind of kick the dust up a little bit and create a little bit of friction and waves and think about new ways of doing things, new ways to differentiate, I've got this fantastic thing, but nobody does it, I'm so frustrated. Branding that is so much easier than the company. I mean, imagine if Russell Thackeray came to me and said, well, actually, I want to be the next Apple, or I've decided I want to be the next Microsoft. Could you help me get there? And all I want to do is imitate and copy and, whatever they're doing, I'm going to try to do. Where would the playfulness, the fun, the joy be in that? So as opposed to saying, I want to be that next thing, I'm going to do something different. It doesn't exist yet. So I think it makes our job easier, but it helps us then target who we want to target. So you don't need to spend a load on marketing to everybody. You can be more niched, more focused, because you've got a clearer idea, not only of yourself and what you're good at and what you're capable of and where your weaknesses are and what type of businesses you couldn't support, but also who you want to talk to and where you want to get a reaction from.
I think it's one of the most disciplined things in business is to know your tribe, know your posse, know your segment, know your market, and be who you want to be. And it's that thing about learning to say no, isn't it? Learning to exclude yourselves from different places as really, really. And you talk to lots of entrepreneurs and they'll say things like, well, who's your market? And they'll say, everybody, is because I'm selling this generic thing. You say, well, are you sure? Even like podcast people, we don't think enough about who our audience is often and who we want to market, because actually a podcast is a thing, it's a document, people run across it, all that sort of stuff. But you have to have some idea of the audience you're serving, otherwise you're serving no one. So I like it, and yours is really I'm going to say it's groovy because that's from my era, and I unashamedly will say it's fab and groovy.
Fantastic. I think also I would go even further. I think you can't market and can't talk to the masses. So if you don't have in your mind, who are you talking to? That it can either be a real person because they are actually your ideal client. You've met them, you know them, or you've taken some time to really sit down and understand, the attributes and the qualities and what would that person want to hear. I think unless you've done that kind of really clear view that you're reading our website, you read the web, that's just you. I can't, there's very rare you get this group reading kind of website. So I think it's not only the type of, but it's really thinking, who would be the buyer, the individual that, where do they hang out? What kind of, what do they do at work? Where are they at in their life? So I think the greater sense you've got of who you want to be writing for and to, the more chance you're going to have of connecting with them. So we obviously want these rebels with a cause. We want these kind of principled and supported. We don't just want people being rebellious just to be rebellious. We want people who want to do something, change something, go somewhere, purposeful rebellion. So that's who we have in mind when we're doing our work, which makes it easier to do the sort of tone of voice and how we position things. So I think it just really helps you as well as, identify as the right people to talk to.
Chris, I've just looked at the time and I've realized that our 20-minute conversation has turned into 53 minutes, so I
53 minutes.
apologize.
I do apologize. It's my
No, no,
fault.
no, no,
Sorry.
thank you.
We've already got 3 more podcast contents to go as a
I've
result, I
got
think.
as the 3 people who are left are really enjoying it because that's the point, isn't it? You know, we've lost a load of corporate buddy duddies. But look, thank you for spending time with us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I really, really do appreciate it. And good luck to everything you're doing. I've had a good time today and it's been fantastic. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. And likewise, Russell, if either I or my co-founder can help or support, then do let us know when you're.
I'm
But
already
thank you for
thinking
the
of
opportunity.
reaching out. You take care.
Bless you. You too. Cheers.